and welcome to another episode of TDNY, because I gotta. If you are old enough to have seen that movie reference in cinemas, don't forget to stand up and stretch. You likely need it. You're listening to This Day Not Year, the podcast that looks back at the week ahead. This episode, we have another serving of 7 new stories, pulled straight from the history books for you. Plus, 7 new song pairings for these stories and your listening pleasure. As a little taste of what's to come, on this episode we'll learn when losing your head isn't always the end. About the most expensive museum heist. How easy early bank robberies were to commit. What stopped the clocks in the 1940s? Plus a whole lot more along the way. So, stretch! Sit back, relax, and let's kick off the week with Monday, March 17th. On this day, not year, a star was found dead in a hotel room, headless. But was that what really killed Mike? Is your hometown known for anything special? A local legend perhaps, or maybe a celebrity grew up there? For Fruita, Colorado, they have a bit of both. As you drive through the small town of 14,000, travelling down Aspen Avenue, just before you reach Circle Park, stands the old bank building. Constructed in 1900 and becoming the first national bank of Fruita 6 years later. Today it has been outfitted as a coffee shop, but that isn't the only change. Perched on a wall out front stands a large metal sculpture of a chicken, made from old metal scrap such as horseshoes, axe heads, and other instruments. Unveiled back in March 2000 and created by local artist Lyle Nichols. Although you would be forgiven for thinking that Lyle never finished his work, as although the giant chicken is an excellent replica of the domesticated bird, this metal one is missing a rather crucial part: the head. This is no accident. It is entirely by design, and celebrates Fruita, Colorado's own local legend and celebrity, Mike. Back in 1945, town residents Lloyd and Clara Olson were expecting Clara's mother around for dinner. World War II had just ended and American homes were slowly moving away from the mindset and laws that saw them rationing items, from fats to sugars to meats. It wasn't uncommon for many homes to supplement the rations with homegrown vegetables from their victory gardens, or by keeping chickens for eggs and meat. So, with rationing out and his mother-in-law on the way, wanting chicken, Lloyd Olson took his axe, and it was to be the chopping block for Mike, the 5-month-old Wyandotte. It's here that the story becomes a bit muddied, with some claiming that the mother-in-law particularly favoured chicken neck as her cut of choice, so Lloyd was looking to preserve as much as possible, while others claim that Lloyd just had a poor swing. In either case, the axe came down, and Mike's head was parted from his body. Perhaps you've heard the phrase running around like a headless chicken. Well, it turns out that is more literal than not. And so, Lloyd waited for Mike to catch up to the fact that his goose was cooked, so to speak. And he waited, and waited, and waited. All the while, Mike, the now headless chicken, continued to strut about, even attempting to crow, although producing little more than a gurgle. It had turned out that, although losing most of his head, the majority of the important functions for a chicken to be a chicken are found in the brainstem, a part that Mike still retained. As he was still up and strutting the following day, the Olsons started to care for Mike the headless chicken, feeding him with an eyedropper containing milk and water, and the occasional corn kernel shoved down the gullet. A month after becoming headless, Mike was shown off in Salt Lake City, about 280 miles or 450 kilometers away. Lloyd was charging, As per the October 1945 issue of Life magazine, 25 cents for the public to view Mike, and offering to sell the bird for $10,000, or $170,000 today. As a quick aside, the most expensive breed of chicken today, according to Google, is the Indonesian Ayam Cemani, a breed that suffers from a condition known as fibromyalanosis, resulting in an entirely black bird, from feathers to meat to bone, and can sell from between $2,500 to $6,000, which is still about 30 to 70 times cheaper than the headless Mike was going for. So this was the life for Mike and the Olsons for the next 18 months, touring the country, showing Mike off at various fairs and sideshows, all the while owning a nice little nest egg themselves. As per Wikipedia, at the height of his popularity, the chicken's owners earned $4,500 per month, which is about $70,000 today. Although on this day in 1947, this would all end in tragedy in a hotel room in Phoenix, Arizona. The day prior, the Olsons had been showing Mike off at a sideshow, but awoke to the sounds of him choking. This wasn't an unusual occurrence for the chicken, and the usual solution was to syringe out the mucus blocking the airway. Only, after searching their room, they came to the realization that they had left the syringe at the sideshow from the previous day. They could only watch on as their meal ticket, Mike the Headless Chicken, finally expired. While Mike didn't rise from the ashes in Phoenix, his legacy would eventually live on. The story of Mike would be nearly forgotten by all, until the late 1990s saw the Colorado Chamber of Commerce dig deep into the archives looking for any nugget of history that would make for an exciting Colorado Heritage Week topic. They found Mike. Fruita embraced their long-lost legend, starting up the Mike the Headless Chicken Day, a community event that has run since 1999 to now, featuring the 5K run like a headless chicken race, headless Mike mascots and merchandise, plus drinks from local brewers and music from local bands. And, of course, plenty of vendors serving chicken in all cuts and styles too. In the year 2000, Mike was immortalized not just in sculpture, but in cyberspace, as MikeTheHeadlessChicken.org launched, and is still around to this day. The original website even featured a fan mail section. So let me conclude this story with an email from Alan to Mike. Mike, the descriptions of your amateur surgery and its post-operation lack of consequences confirms for me what I have long suspected about many of my co-workers, that they could easily survive north of the neck amputations and continue to function at their present levels of excellence. Alan. While a myriad of songs about headless chickens, or Mike the Headless Chicken specifically, do exist, from Do the Headless Chicken by the Headless Chickens to Mike the Headless Chicken by Decolonize Your Mind Society. But the song I'm pairing with today's story is probably one that stuck in the nightmares of many children who saw the music video back in the early 2000s. Basement Jaxx's hit, Where's Your Head At? Tuesday, March 18th. On this day, not year, two police officers stop to get a closer look at art. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, Massachusetts, was opened in 1903 by Isabella Stewart Gardner. Isabella, born 1840, was one of Boston high society's great eccentric personalities, known for walking a lion named Rex, or knocking back beer instead of tea at soirees. She once upstaged a local orchestra by appearing in the audience sporting a headband with the phrase, "Oh, you Red Sox," emblazoned on it. Isabella spent much of her life hopping between America, Europe, the Middle East, and many other places around the world. Starting at first for education, but eventually, once married, doing so on the order of doctors after suffering from depression. And finally because she developed a taste for art collecting. This later development saw her purchasing works from great masters, but also examples of fine art from all over the world. Although she donated much of her collection to the Harvard Lampoon Building, aka Lampoon Castle, during her life, her own house having outgrown her collection. After the death of her husband Jack in 1898, she got to work on starting a project the both of them had wanted to achieve: building a museum to house their collection. The museum, styled after a 15th century Venetian palace, was designed under Isabella's careful instructions, with the art and decorations hung at her own aesthetic pleasing. And the museum was greater for it. An article in the New York Times praising the museum. "The Gardner Museum is one of the best loved in the United States. Paintings are hung close together and interspaced with fine furniture and decorative art." Opening as a private function in 1903, before public access was allowed later that year, Isabella displayed her uniqueness once more by serving champagne paired with donuts. A 4-storied palace, the Gardner Museum contained a vast collection of everything Isabella had devoted her life to, and overseeing it from the 4th floor was Isabella herself, maintaining and improving the museum until the day she died in 1924, passing away in the museum much of her later years had been devoted to. So great was her desire to control the museum's every aspect that it even continued after her death, with her will stating that nothing could be changed from the greater disposition of the first 3 floors, or else it was all to be auctioned off. Isabella wanted her collection displayed for the education and enjoyment of the public forever. So that's how the museum remained for the next 66 years. As times advanced, changes in technology, security, and preservation grew, but the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum remained the same, a time capsule within a time capsule. Until March 18th, 1990. 2 guards, Rick Abath, 23, and Randy Heston, 25, were on duty that night. The streets outside were full of drunken partygoers, celebrating St. Patrick's Day, but inside the museum it was business as usual. Doing the rounds around 1 a.m., Rick Abath disabled several alarms, as they were tripping without any reason. As he walked the building, he also opened a side door and glanced out, perhaps taking in the sights and sounds of the drunk partiers. Getting back to the security desk a little after, he settled in for another long night, until the buzzer went off. Someone was outside. Through the intercom, the unannounced buzzers explained that they were police, and that someone had reported a disturbance inside the museum. Being able to see the men through a security camera eased any suspicions Abath might have had, as they were dressed as police. So he buzzed them in. It wasn't long until both Rick Abath and Randy Heston found themselves handcuffed, their heads wrapped in layers of duct tape, and they were led into the basement and detained there for the rest of the night. It was now 1:35 a.m., and the 2 police come art thieves got to work. At 8 a.m. that morning, the cleaning crew of the museum arrived and buzzed the intercom, waiting to be let in. The only way inside for the crew was for someone inside to open the door. They tried again and again, realizing that something must be very wrong. The only other person with a key was contacted, the security director, who upon entering the building found nobody at the front desk and immediately called the police. When police arrived, they swept the building and found the 2 guards, still tied up and worse from their experience, but still very much alive. Unfortunately, a closer examination would also find 13 pieces from the museum had now vanished. The stolen works included 3 by Rembrandt, 5 by Degas, 1 Monet, Flink and Vermeer each, as well as an ancient Chinese gu drinking vessel and a Napoleonic finial. The estimated combined total was $200 million in the 90s, but that figure rose to $600 million in the late 2000s. Although the security at the museum was extensive, it wasn't modern by any means, and only allowed investigators to track which rooms the thieves had entered and when, which led to more mystery, as although the total value of the stolen art goods makes it one of, if not the, largest art heist in history, the thieves also passed up smaller and often more valuable pieces. The museum director, Anne Hawley, immediately offered up to a $1 million reward to anyone who could return the artworks. This reward was open to the thieves too, the only stipulation being that the artwork was returned. Over the years, that offer was increased to $5 million, and now it's at $10 million. But, to this day, it has remained unclaimed. The thieves have never been identified, despite a long list of possible suspects, and the art has never resurfaced. Perhaps one day it will be found in someone's collection, or by a family member inheriting an old estate, and the art pieces can finally be returned to the empty frames still hanging in the museum. But, so far, this theft is still a mystery. Slightly out of left field, I think a fairly fitting song for this story is Just the Way You Are by Billy Joel. Originally a song written about his first wife, I feel the lyrics fit quite nicely with Isabella's sentiment towards a museum. Don't go changing to try and please me. Don't go trying some new fashion. I want you just the way you are. Wednesday, March 19th. On this day, not year, one of the first bank heists in America had just started. Imagine, if you will, you're the keeper of a lodging house, the landlord. Over your years, you've seen all manner of strange people come and go. Today, March 21st, brings another strange customer, a man who always seems to be looking over his shoulder, lugging in 3 large trunks. He calls himself Jones and rents out a private room. Offer to help him with his luggage, only for him to snap back not to touch it. You comply, but your curiosity is piqued, especially when you read the morning paper and find there's a $5,000 reward for any information leading to the suspects behind the Citibank robbery over the weekend. Do you alert the authorities to your suspicions, take matters into your own hands, or just ignore the whole situation? But all that is getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the night in question first. March 19th, 1831, New York. James Honeyman and William Murray had a plan. A rather simple plan, admittedly, but prior to this, they had been rather simple criminals. James had a history of robbery with a failed attempt stealing from a steamboat, and was also caught the year prior after robbing a store, although he escaped any punishment due to a lack of evidence. Some reports even state the duo were ex-convicts from Botany Bay. After serving their time, they had returned to England and their criminal ways, before fleeing to America. Their plan for tonight was simple: rob Citibank. The Citibank of New York was born in 1812, after Congress didn't renew the charter on the creatively named First Bank of the United States. Many of those invested in the FB of the US came together to help form the Citibank. It even opened up in the same building, what is now 48 Wall Street, as it already had the vault and furnishings fit for a bank. Citibank would go on to help fund the War of 1812, which saw our friend from episode 9, Benjamin Morrell, keeping English jails at capacity. Citibank would also be a large funder in the construction of the Panama Canal. The chairman of Citibank in 1831 was Isaac Wright, an investor who had a hand in the first scheduled shipping lane between America and England. He would go on to die of cholera inside the bank the year after in 1832. Today, Citibank still exists as Citibank, which I realize doesn't make much sense when spoken. Rather than City, C-I-T-Y, from its 1812 opening, it changed to City, C-I-T-I, in 1976, and lost the space between City and Bank. Despite a Season 3 episode of Friends claiming the bank would go under, today it is the third largest bank in the United States, but I digress. When we think bank heist today, it's not unusual for the mind to drift towards the highly planned and technical operations found in a movie like Ocean's 11, or maybe the more brazen approach of our friend Willie the actor Sutton. Somehow, the heist from our story today manages to be neither brazen, highly planned, or overall technical. It's not known how, as if any reports ever contained details, they have been lost to time, but somehow our budding thieves, James Honeyman and William Murray, were able to forge keys to the Citibank based on wax impressions of the door locks. Then, on the night of March 19th, they simply walked up to the bank, unlocked the front door, walked in, and started looting. As morning was approaching, the duo started hauling away their loot, even remembering to lock the door behind them. In total, they made off with $240,000, an amount over $52 million in 2015 currency. A haul consisting of notes and coins, stored from many smaller branches across the city, and even 398 gold doubloons. Making their way back to William's house, the pair split the loot, and James made his way, with 3 trunks, to book into a nearby lodging house on Elm Street, or Lafayette Street today, about a 35 to 40 minute walk away from the Citibank. While this wasn't the first US bank robbery, as many articles claimed for a while, it was still the first widely reported one, with newspaper stories the following day reading, $5,000 reward. The Citibank of this city, having been entered by means of false keys and robbed of a large amount of banknotes, the above reward is offered for the recovery of the property and a proportionate sum for any part. And banks and dealers in money are particularly requested to be on their guard against unknown or suspicious persons who may offer to exchange or purchase gold or other money. Safely hidden away in new lodgings, under a false name, James Honeyman divided his ill-gotten goods further, and, again for reasons unknown, split some away for his brother-in-law, Mr. Parkinson. The evening of March 24th, or maybe early April, again records for this are a little uncertain, James left the lodgings carrying one of the trunks with him, telling the landlord he would soon return for the others. His suspicion getting the better of him, the landlord contacted New York Constable Jacob Hayes, chief of the day police force. Hayes had been on the trail of James since day one, with Honeyman being the prime suspect in his eyes. He had searched his home, but his wife and child hadn't seen him, and Constable Hayes was left without direction. Now, this tip-off from the lodgings could be the big break he needed. Together, Hayes and the landlord entered the empty room, opened one of the remaining 2 trunks, and hidden beneath a layer of clothing was the stolen money. Waiting for James to return, the landlord also told Constable Hayes of another man who would frequently visit James, a man Hayes recognized as William Murray. After hours of waiting, James Honeyman returned, only for Constable Hayes to rise from the darkness and drag him off to jail. Murray would prove harder to locate, having fled the city, but was eventually tracked down too. The thieving duo was sentenced to 5 years in Sing Sing prison, and the money was recovered. Just not all of it. Nearly $100,000 was still missing. Months later, the brother-in-law, Mr. Parkinson, attempted to use some of his cut, but it was identified, and in an immunity plea he handed over the money and told the police all he knew. Although this still left between $42,000 and $63,000 missing, a total that included all of the gold doubloons. To this day, it has never been recovered, and no one knows what happened to it. Although, I have my suspicions that our landlord, the keeper at the Elm Street lodgings, may have found himself richer for James Honeyman's stay. To quote the song Master of the House from Les Mis, reasonable charges, plus some little extras on the side. While Master of the House may be a hypothetically fitting song, it's only hypothetical at best. A much better fit for the full story is the song Keys to the Bank by Dawson Smith, with the lyrics, I got the keys to the bank, I got the devil to thank, I got 31 days till I get the call. Thursday, March 20th. And on this day, not year, time was running out for these Chicago shoppers. The store wouldn't open until midday, but a line stretching from the shop doors had been growing since early morning. Over 2,500 women, and what the New York Times describes as a few brave men, were waiting in line. Tensions may have been high, as although the line was 2,500 strong, the item they all desired only numbered 1,500. Finally, the time came and the doors opened. The crowd surged forward, all rushing into the store and wanting to get what they had come for and get out again. But this was war. Again, from the New York Times, 3 women fainted, several clerks were trampled, and 4 showcases were shattered today before police were able to restore order. Clerks from nearby counters administered first aid to the wilting women and served as temporary nursemaids to children whose mothers forgot them in the furor of battle. In some rather sexist reporting of the Times, newspapers describe how those brave men were swept aside by the more experienced shopper, the woman, but also how even some men and women balked at the ocean of shoppers and were pulled across counters to safety by equally overwhelmed clerks. What were all these shoppers looking to buy? What was the cause of the hours of queuing and the in-store frenzy? They were after something that hadn't been in stock in Chicago for 2 years, an alarm clock. The year was 1944, and much like with our Mike the Headless Chicken story, rationing was at the heart of this shortage. Clocks contain a lot of metal, notably brass and steel, and it had been decided early in World War II that these metals would better serve the war effort as bullets, guns, tanks, etc., which left a minuscule amount for clock production. The war alarm clock, which was the model sold during the war, used 42 times less brass than pre-war. As per a 1943 published Tick Talk magazine quote, in this model, the WPB, War Production Board, specifies the use of but 7 pounds of brass for every 1,000 clocks, whereas in normal production, we would use 300 pounds for every 1,000 clocks. Many pre-war clock manufacturers had been repurposed for the war effort. With their expertise in production, they were switched over to producing aircraft instruments, compasses, or the delicate fuse mechanisms required in munitions. While American clocks were suffering, this time did see a rise in Swiss-made wristwatches, and indeed the wristwatch gained more popularity in the populace. However, the lack of real alarm clocks started to have an unintended, but perhaps easily foreseen consequence. People were arriving late to work. In a time when everyone had to do their part, many were instead, quite literally, asleep on the job. Once more from the New York Times, from their March 18th, 1943 edition, the War Production Board has approved resumption of the manufacture of alarm clocks. It was learned today, hoping thus to contribute to an increase in output by getting workers up on time. It had turned out that the board was receiving hundreds of letters from workers, complaining about oversleeping and their inability to solve this problem with the purchase of a simple alarm clock. This wasn't even a uniquely American problem, with many shops in Australia receiving equally irate letters, from angry housewives this time, who had taken up the role of alarm clock themselves to wake spouses countrywide. They demanded to know when the next alarm clocks would be ready for purchase. So, in 1943, 1,700,000 war alarm clocks were to be manufactured, with a capped price of $1.65 and made of a rather dubious material quality. What was described as moulded wood fibre, which is lacquered, was really just cardboard. This production was ramped up next year, in 1944, with 3,300,000 clocks produced, and of that, only 1,500 made it to the unspecified Chicago store, which is pretty much it for this story. So let's just Animal House the rest. World War II ended the year after, in 1945. Alarm clocks would go back to pre-war manufacturing numbers in 1946. As for a fitting song, well, there's really only one choice. A story about an alarm clock riot over people missing work from sleeping in? It has to be Wake Up Jeff by the Wiggles. Friday, March 21st. On this day, not year, the sanctuary was to be cleansed in fire and destruction. In 1782, William Miller was born, the firstborn son of a Revolutionary War soldier and a Baptist's daughter. William was homeschooled for the first 9 years of his life, before joining a newly built school. At 21 years old, he married and moved to his wife's hometown to work as a farmer. It was here, after reading works by Voltaire, Thomas Paine, among others, and after conversing with many in his new home, that he lost his Baptist faith and became a deist, someone who believes in a non-interfering God, and thus everything that happens must come down to mortal reasons. William and his wife, Lucy, started a family of their own, although in what must have surely been confusing for them, William's parents never stopped increasing their own family and William's siblings, which ended with 3 of William's own children being older than some of their aunts and uncles. Life continued on for the Millers until 1812 rolled around and William enlisted in the war. For a lot of the War of 1812, William saw no fighting, instead working as a recruiter. But his luck ran out in September 1814. The Battle of Plattsburgh, or the Battle of Lake Champlain, saw an outnumbered American force defeat a British force nearly twice its number. It also, according to William Miller, saw a miracle. An explosive device landed 2 feet in front of William, exploded, and killed 1 person standing next to him, injuring 3 others, while William, as close as he was, wasn't hurt. He wasn't even touched. Despite his deist beliefs, he could only see this as an act of divine intervention, a miracle that would see him turn back to his Baptist upbringing. His deist friends were at odds with the change of heart, and questioned him, to which William replied, "If you give me time, I will harmonize all apparent contradictions to my own satisfaction, or I will be a deist still." So William started studying the Bible. He didn't just read it, he obsessed over it, pored over every minute detail, reading every line, every word, trying to find some hidden meaning, some secret that no one before had managed to pass out of the text. Then, one day, in 1818, he found it. The date of Christ's second coming. Miller based his beliefs in Daniel 8:14, which stated, "Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed." Using something known as the year for a day principle, which some scholars believe is a coded system written into the Bible, where days mentioned in prophecies actually represent years. An example of this can be found in Genesis 29:27, which states, "Finish this daughter's bridal week as in 7 days, and continues, "Then we will give you the younger one also, in return for another 7 years of work." A week equaling 7 years. A year for a day. This belief has been around since at least the 4th century and is still a belief in some religions today. Miller believed that the 2,300 days referenced in Daniel 8:14 actually referred to 2,300 years, and that the sanctuary that was to be cleansed was earth. Cleansed in a rapture as Jesus returned and brought the worthy up to heaven. Convincing himself he was correct in this interpretation, he spent the next few years checking over his work and narrowing down the day when this event was to happen. Eventually he realized the 2,300 years should be counted from 457 BC, when Jerusalem was announced to be rebuilt, placing the year of the Second Coming at 1843. William narrowed this down further, stating, "My principles in brief are that Jesus Christ will come again to this earth, clean, purify, and take possession of the same with all the saints, sometime between March 21st, 1843, and March 21st, 1844. So, with 12 years left to go, in 1831, William Miller, farmer, ex-soldier, father, became a preacher. Travelling to a nearby town, he began his public lecturing, explaining what he had found, pleading with people that the end was nigh and that they needed to be saved. Soon many were coming to hear from William, with others writing in requesting for him to travel and spread his views in their own towns. And by 1834, too overwhelmed by requests, he published a booklet on what was quickly becoming known as Millerism. The Millerites, who believed in Millerism, continued to grow over the coming years, with William's preaching gaining traction, and changing from a small belief to a large religious movement, with estimates of over 100,000 followers, some even pushing that number up higher to 500,000, or maybe even 1 million followers around the globe. 2 Millerite newspapers began publishing, Signs of the Times and The Midnight Cry, and soon the earliest date, March 21st, 1843, came and went. The latest date, March 21st, 1844, also passed. Discussions were held, the numbers were crunched again, and a new day was announced, April 18th, 1844, which also passed without any event. A final date was divined, now known as the 7th month message, which believed that the actual day would be the 10th day of the 7th month of the present year, 1844, which of course meant October 22nd. What, were you thinking July 10th? No, these predictions were based on the Karaite Jewish calendar. So the final day came, followers prepared accordingly. They sold off their earthly possessions, abandoned work, farmers left fields untended and produce unpicked. Many donned pure white gowns, with many also climbing to the highest points they could, believing it would help in their ascension. The hours passed, the day fading. A few believers started to leave, with more following as the day turned to night, and the 22nd to the 23rd. No second coming had appeared. A travel journal of an Englishman, Mr. Charles Lyell, published in 1849, tells of his travels around America shortly after the Millerite last prediction of October 22nd. In a subsequent part of our tour, several houses were pointed out to us between Plymouth and Boston, the owners of which had been reduced from ease to poverty by their credulity, having sold their all. This period is now known as the Great Disappointment to Millerites, with many losing faith in the movement and others starting their own offshoots of the religion, some even surviving to this day, with the Seventh-day Adventists being just one example. William Miller, who never doubted his beliefs, passed away a few years later in 1849, believing that it had just been a calculation error and the true day was still only just around the corner. The song pairing for this story comes from the Broadway musical Sweet Charity, with The Rhythm of Life. And while Sammy Davis Jr.'s version is excellent, I feel the Diana Ross cover just hits a little harder and faster. So hit the road, daddy, leave your common-law wife, spread the religion of the rhythm of life. Saturday, March 22nd. On this day, not year, the HMMWV was conceived. In the early 1980s, the American military was facing a problem, specifically, for this story at least, a troop transport problem. Since the 1950s, America had been relying on the MUT to get around on the ground. The M151 MUT, or Military Utility Tactical Truck, was designed by the Ford Motor Company after being awarded a contract to replace the aging fleet of Jeeps, or Willys MB, the workhorse of World War II. Only now it was time, once again, for the MUT to go the way of the Jeep, and on this day in 1983, from the 61 companies that applied, and the 5 that submitted an actual prototype, AM General were awarded a contract of over $1 billion by the Pentagon to produce a fleet of 55,000 HMMWVs. Just what is a HMMWV? It stands for a High Mobility Multi-Purpose Wheeled Vehicle. Perhaps you'll know it better by another name though, Humvee. The Humvee could clear a 16-inch obstacle, traverse 5-foot deep water, climb a 60% incline, and carry up to 2,500 pounds or 1,100 kilograms. With a top speed of 70 miles or 113 kilometers per hour, and a large cabin to contain the bulkier kit and accessories of the modern soldier. While the Humvee was excellent off-road, it struggled in the urban environment, with the bulky body making navigating tight streets a difficulty and a constant danger. This, combined with the aluminium chassis that was easy to shoot through, as demonstrated in the opening of the 2008 movie Iron Man, saw the Humvee more at home in a 4x4 environment rather than the urban military operations. That is, until Arnold Schwarzenegger wanted one. While the plan had always been to produce a civilian model, these plans were quickened at the constant calls by Arnold. I'm sure the barrage of calls was soon enough for even GM to quit whining. Schwarzenegger had seen a convoy of the vehicles in 1990 while filming Kindergarten Cop and wanted one, and in 1992 he got his wish, as the Hummer, as this model was called, was released, with the first 2 being sold to Arnold himself. This led to a weird era of warring concepts on masculinity, with Hummer right in the center. The metrosexual was on the rise, the concept of a well-groomed, more modern, more stylish man, which was starkly at odds with the image a Hummer driver wanted to present, which led to some very weird marketing from Hummer. A Forbes article claimed that driving a Hummer would inevitably alter one's hormonal balance, or an advertisement showing a vegan buying a Hummer to show off to a man in a supermarket buying too much meat. No matter what these commercials were trying to achieve, the Hummer was soon a goner, as General Motors, who had purchased the rights in 1999, announced their bankruptcy in 2009, although a 2020 revival of the brand as an electronic vehicle has since occurred. Many have cited this as an attempt at greenwashing, though, as the weight of the vehicles contributes to faster road and tyre wear and more waste and waste particles shed as a result. Today, the Humvee can be found serving in Ukraine, with nearly 5,000 vehicles in the country donated by NATO allies. Like the Jeep and the Mutt before it, the Humvee is the Swiss Army knife of vehicles for Ukraine soldiers, serving as mobile weapon platforms, ambulances, electronic warfare and jamming platforms, mine clearing vehicles, and a range of other uses and variations. As for a fitting song, I think taking the toxic masculinity on board, the song Asshole by Denis Leary may be quite fitting for this story, especially the lyric, "I'm gonna drive around in that baby at 115 miles per hour, getting 1 mile per gallon." And of course, with a song like that, a language warning on this song pairing. Sunday, March 23rd. On this day, not year, one ship got the world talking. The year was 2021, and the world was in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Many cities were in lockdown, many countries had tightened restrictions on when and why you could leave the house. All of this led to an increase in online shopping, which in turn led to an increase, for many countries, in importing. Which brings us to the star of our story today, the container ship Ever Given. Just shy of 400 meters long, this makes it one of the largest container ships in the world. For comparison, the Titanic was only 269 meters long, while the Tokyo Express, the container ship from our story in episode 5, was a paltry 287 meters long. Suffice to say, Ever Given is a monster of a container ship, weighing in at 220,000 tons, and capable of carrying a little under 100,000 tons of cargo. First launching in 2018, if all went well, it would be unlikely the world at large would ever know the name Ever Given. Things didn't go well. In March 2021, the Ever Given was travelling from Malaysia to the Netherlands. It was 85% full, carrying 18,000 cargo containers, loaded with, as per maritime sources, electronics, machinery and parts, household goods, furniture, and footwear. Slowly, the ship was making its way across the Indian Ocean, heading towards the Suez Canal and disaster. As a quick aside, the Suez Canal opened in 1869, under construction for 10 years beforehand, is a 193-kilometre man-made stretch of water through Egypt, connecting the Red Sea through to the Mediterranean Sea, allowing ships to bypass the lengthy and potentially dangerous route that would otherwise see them travelling around the Cape of Good Horn and adding up to an extra 10 days of travel time, depending on destination. 23rd of March 2021. The Ever Given had reached and was travelling down the single-lane stretch of the Suez Canal when a sandstorm struck the ship. Winds up to 74 kilometers per hour hammered into the gigantic vessel, and despite its weight, the ship lost the ability to steer and slowly listed to the side before it ran aground, the front and rear of the vessel wedging against either side of the canal. While not common, tugboats were on hand for just such an occasion, and had reached the Ever Given half an hour later. The little boat that could, these were not, and the larger ship remained stuck. All the while, traffic was building up on either side of the canal, with around 370 ships waiting for their turn to traverse. And in this industry, time very much is money. It was estimated that each minute the canal was blocked was the equivalent of a $7 million loss. The half hour it took for the tugboats to reach the Ever Given? That's $210 million in losses. When the tugboats failed to shift the ship, digging equipment was brought in to try and dig the ship loose enough that the tugboats could give it that final pull free. The ship wasn't freed until March 29th, nearly 150 hours, or $63 billion worth of losses, later. Good news for some ships, but bad news for others. Not being able to wait on the unknown rescue timeline, they had instead opted for the known delay in traversing around Africa instead of through the canal. This delay also put undue stress on many shipping yards, as the hold-up meant that schedules were thrown out and docks would see many ships requiring unloading over a much shorter time, a time when workers were already stretched thin due to the global pandemic. So while it wasn't all roses, at least the Ever Given was finally on its way. Right? Wrong. The Egyptian government had pulled the ship aside, impounding it, over the refusal of the ship to pay a fine of close to $916 million. Something to think about the next time you get a parking ticket. Perhaps a rather obvious choice, but with lyrics, avarice and greed are going to drive you over the endless sea, and I don't want to sail with this ship of fools. I feel Ship of Fools by World Party is more than fitting for this story. Now, the part of the show to see how much attention you've paid. Are you ready? 7 questions coming up. Feel free to pause and rewind if you miss one. So, question 1 from story 1. What's special about the Ayam Cemani breed of chicken? Question 2 from Tuesday. What sporting team did Isabella's headband support in her opera Disruption? Question 3 from Wednesday. What was the reward offered for the capture of the City Bank thieves? Question 4 from Thursday. With over 2,500 people queuing, how many clocks were available for purchase? Question 5 and Friday. What was the biblical passage that inspired William Miller to believe that Christ was coming? Question 6 from Saturday. While Humvee may be the more common name today, what is the actual acronym for this military vehicle? And question 7 for Sunday. What was one thing that Ever Given was shipping when it got stuck? And some answers. The answer for Monday. The Ayam Cemani suffers from fibromyalanosis, meaning it has black feathers and meat. The answer for Tuesday. Isabella's headband was in support of the Red Sox team. Answer 3 for Wednesday. It was a $5,000 reward offered for the Citibank thieves. Answer 4 for Thursday. There were 1,500 clocks on sale. Answer 5 for Friday. The biblical passage was Daniel 8:14. Answer 6 for the Saturday. The Humvee's acronym is HMMWV. And answer 7 for the Sunday. What was one thing the Ever Given was shipping? Electronics, machinery and parts, household goods, furniture, and footwear. So, how did you manage this week? Memory hasn't let you down just yet? Or you could always listen through again and have another go at the quiz then. In either case, thank you for listening to another episode, our 10th episode, of This Day Not Year. As per usual, thisdaynotyear@gmail.com for any criticisms or corrections. If you've liked what you've heard, be sure to follow, rate, and maybe tell a friend or two to give us a listen too. I'll be back again next week, so long as there's history, taking a look back at the 24th to the 30th of March. Until then, keep well and have an historic week.